Welcome to Large Wood, Long Legacy, a design project that communicates ecological concepts through a variety of creative and interpretive and experiential media. As an emerging environmental communication designer, I use design to intrigue people, capture their attention, and make an opportunity for discourse, leading to a greater understanding of ecology that can then be extrapolated outside of the design and ultimately catalyze advocacy. By doing in-depth research and collaborating with scientists, designers, professionals, and educators, I developed a thorough understanding of large wood in different ecosystems of Western Oregon, and am interpreting this understanding through landscape installations and experiences. To contextualize this project, I turned to case studies that help me understand science communication through art and design. From these case studies, I learned about the importance of an aesthetic strategy, which can be summed by the instrumenting of relevant colors, materials, and cultural themes to increase the impact of a particular narrative. The case study identified two aesthetic strategies, mirroring and friction synthesis, both of which are used in large wood, long legacy. However, these two specific strategies, this case study pointed out, share the strength of hybridizing colors, materials, and cultural themes to create something visually intriguing and deeply integral to the narrative. My main precedents for this project are David Buckley Borden, Mark Dion, Maya Lin, and Buster Simpson. From the mixing of these precedents, elements of large wood and long legacy have formed. To the average person, large wood has many synonyms. However, it's important to define those synonyms in the context of forests and explore their origins and values. A lot of these synonyms used to describe wood imply a monetary value or incite the idea of waste. Large wood is defined by ecologists to have a diameter of 10 centimeters for more than 1 meter in length. Large wood has caught my interest because it is an important underappreciated element of our landscape, and it's a vessel of life, nutrients, geomorphological processes, and more. This vessel, large wood, connects us to policies, ecologies, history, geology, culture, and the economy through different spatial scales from the forest to the sea. The most bountiful source of large wood in Western Oregon has been the old growth forests, where trees live for hundreds and last often thousands of years once they senesce or die and become large wood. Once a tree meets the forest floor, where it could rest for hundreds or even thousands of years, it goes through both physical and chemical changes. Each fallen tree makes contact with the forest floor in its own unique way. This contact creates a gradient of conditions that change the physical and chemical composition, providing different opportunities for organisms. Here, large wood becomes an important corridor for the movement of critters in the old growth forest. But in the event of a large rain event, large wood near water bodies can get pushed down to larger rivers. Large wood in the river ecosystem plays an important role in the geomorphological processes that shape our water bodies. It gets snagged on the riverbed, on large rocks, on other large wood, and accumulates sediment, changing the shape and flow of the river. This large wood creates riffles and pools important for the rearing of our beloved anadromous fish. Pools are where the stream deepens and water slows. Fish like trout and coho salmon feed in these pools. The depth and tranquility of this water provide habitat that allows different types and ages of fish to inhabit their preferred water level. The wood protruding from the surface of this water is used by birds like the great blue heron or the belted kingfisher to hunt the fish. As large pieces of wood bound down the river, generally during floods, they knock large wood loose, sending it further downstream. In Western Oregon, our rivers eventually lead to the Pacific Ocean. Here, a cyclic dance between rivers and oceans create a fluid mixing and exchanging of sediment, nutrients, and debris. The estuary is a flat yet complex, muddy environment where large wood provides a welcomed structure. As ocean tides push and pull at the estuary, large wood slowly makes its way to the shore, where currents push it up and down the west coast in the form of driftwood. The destiny of large wood in the marine ecosystem is awe-inspiring. Large wood is at the will of the currents and tides, all of which change with the seasons. While in the clutches of the currents, plants, mollusks, krill, tuna, birds, and insects can inhabit large wood. Entire ecosystems float below the large wood. Even commercial fishers look for adrift wood because of its reputation for hosting commercial fish. This voyage across the Pacific Ocean is a treacherous one. However, large wood acts as a refuge and a vector for all kinds of life during the journey. Large wood can float for such long distances that it can be found washed ashore the beaches of Hawaii. Yet, unlucky voyagers may find themselves risking sinking to the ocean, where they either die from the extreme environmental conditions or are consumed by deep ocean mollusks, crabs, and fish. Despite losing its travelers, large wood continues to support life. The bottom of the ocean is an unforgiving place where nutrients and carbon are hard to come by. Not only do these large pieces of wood provide nourishment to the organisms at the bottom of the ocean, it also provides structural complexity for habitats and entire ecosystems. Unfortunately, these processes have all been halted. And as the river continuum diagram represents, these ecosystems are just a gradient of conditions that are all impacting each other. They're all connected. The Pacific Northwest looks and functions nothing like it has ever before. Early descriptions depict log jams 3/4 of a mile wide and 1/4 of a mile long. Valleys so wet that travelers were confined to the hills, and a Willamette River split into 5 separate channels. This Pacific Northwest was bountiful in large wood. And when the wood was removed from the Willamette River, reports describe the wood being 9 feet in diameter and 120 feet long. In the absence of this large wood, we have all forgotten the importance and profound impacts it has on the landscape, and are only now beginning to seriously explore and consider how we can reintroduce wood back into the Pacific Northwest. And yet, most folks would rather not see the wood because of aesthetics and perceived dangers. Large wood has been removed for a multitude of different reasons throughout colonial history. Congress and the logging industry contracted the Army Corps of Engineers and private stream dredging companies to remove obstructions from rivers. As dams were installed, debris was removed to not damage the infrastructure, and for a while, it was believed that wood in streams obstructed salmon movement. Yet the largest contributor to the systematic removal of large wood over time was the timber industry. Logging has deep roots in Oregon's culture. Oregon has historically been the nation's major timber producing state. Today, Oregon still leads the United States in softwood exports. The logging industry has shaped our coasts, rivers, and forests through intensive forest management, enabling policies and stream improvements. All of this has been supported by a cultural aesthetic to tame, control, and clean up our landscapes. These stream improvements, which include dredging, explosives, and splash dams, were done to ease the transportation of timber through the rivers and streams. This devastated aquatic life by disrupting natural water processes, obstructing fish movement, and overloading the streams with organic matter, leading to a state of long-term ecological tragedy called an ecological legacy. Environmental legacy. These environmental legacies went beyond the river. Initially, logging occurred near water bodies where trees could be felled and immediately pulled to the water and floated to a nearby mill. However, very quickly, the forests near the mills and water bodies were cleared of trees. Logging operations had to spread through the Cascades of the Pacific Northwest as timber cruisers found new stands to harvest. Once new locations were found, logging camps would follow. Teams of men would saw, buck, and rig trees, pulling all the merchantable wood with skidways and tramways to a central location. As timber harvests accumulated, small operations would use oxen to transport logs to rivers. Larger operations would use rail or the iconic log flume, all of which used and reused the wood that was also being harvested. Timber would be moved to the closest improved stream, where river pigs dancing on the rafts of logs would drive timber downriver to the mills. Mills would cut timber to appropriate sizes, either to mill further or send to places such as San Diego via the Benson Raft. The Pacific Northwest provided the wood to cities to develop during the gold rush in California. So in these movements of timber within Oregon, I see a parallel with large woods natural processes. However, the timber extraction was very destructive. And as I described before, the removal of large wood at any point of this continuum creates long-lasting consequences called environmental legacies. Large wood and logging have interesting parallels and conflicts, which I see an interesting opportunity to explore large wood using creative inspiration from Oregon's historic timber industry. It is in this interesting intersection where I propose large wood, long legacy. Large wood, long legacy is a series of landscape installations and experiences that explores the role of large wood in different ecosystems of Western Oregon. This series of landscape installations runs along Highway 126 and transects 3 major ecoregions of Oregon. The trip starts at H.J. Andrews, one of the most important sources of ecological research in our understanding of large wood, and stops at 3 restoration projects that incorporate large wood in their restoration efforts. Additionally, each location sits adjacent to or once hosted logging operations. Some of these are still visible or apparent along the trip. And the trip has a guide as well. The idea of strapping a GPS to a piece of wood is not a new one. Researchers have been doing similar projects for years. This wood, named GPS log, has a GPS attached to it, tracking live data of the movements. The GPS has to face the sky. So GPS log was engineered like a boat to consistently float in the same orientation. And additional graphics and details were added to help distinguish GPS log from other pieces of wood. As the GPS pings every 2 minutes, the data is displayed live on gpslogdrive.com for folks to track GPS log as it makes its way downriver and learn more about large wood with a digital field guide. My collaborator, Cadence Newens, engineered this website to track GPS log and share information about its voyage. Will Bonner will then take this data, which includes altitude and coordinates, and make data visualization art for further interpretation of GPS log's journey. All of this was done to engage an audience outside of Western Oregon. In addition, the Large Wood Long Legacy Field Guide, when paired with the landscape installations, invites visitors to interpret and explore the ecological roles that wood plays in different ecosystems. This field guide explores site-specific topics of large wood, like nurse logs, root wads, and tree islands, and highlights the natural processes depicted in these installations. Okay, so the trip starts at H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, a long-term ecological research station. Other than some historically logged sites, much of H.J. Andrews is old-growth forest, an ecosystem defined by the senescence, or deterioration of trees. Here, large trees fall and become large wood. The fallen trees become habitat and then a nutrient and moisture-rich medium for new trees and plants to grow. Old growth forests are dependent on these microorganisms and fungi utilizing large wood. 25% of the wood in an old growth forest takes the form of downed wood. The fungi that inhabit this wood quickly connects to the greater mycelium network. The accumulation of moisture and nutrients makes decaying logs an incubator for new forests. Seeds of trees like Western hemlock readily germinate on decomposing logs and connect to the mycelium within the large wood, which makes the seedling more resilient and successful. This wood provides new life to the forest, often in the form of nurse logs, providing life from death. This installation raises the nurse log. This installation raises the nurse log to eye level inviting visitors to explore the new life developing on the large wood. The form raising the nurse log is inspired by a log flume, an iconic piece of logging infrastructure that transports large amount of timber to lumber mills throughout the Cascades. This flume form represents the movement and transition from one life form to another. Carved into the inner side of this installation are plants one may find growing from this nurse log. And on the outside of these panels of the flume, is a river continuum diagram that connects the nurse log to H.J. Andrews Lookout Creek and then to the Pacific Ocean. Annotated on this diagram are current or past obstructions and disturbances that impact wood, organisms, and water en route. As visitors go down the Mackenzie Highway, Highway 126, they'll stop at Vierck. Vierck was once a famous logging camp. Today, it is known as a state-of-the-art large wood restoration project managed by the Mackenzie River Land Trust. Here, folks can see engineered log jams and an abundance of large wood in Cone Creek aimed at producing rearing habitat for anadromous fish. An essential element of the log jam is the root wad, whose form and shape acts as an anchor, securing large wood to the banks and beds of the river. This obstruction is called a log jam and is not unlike a beaver dam. Log jams are an integral process or contribute to an integral process of the temperate forest. The various sized spaces and forms within the sunken wad creates habitat for a diversity of aquatic bugs, fish, and microorganisms. Some consider root wads as ecosystem engineers for their ability to make new land for trees to grow on. Their influence on the geomorphology of the river creates a rearing habitat for anadromous fish like salmon and trout. At the Vierck site, visitors will see a partially submerged geometric installation inspired by an engineered root wad that is used in some restoration projects. This installation invites visitors to watch the creek flow through the root wad, possibly seeing wood and creatures interact with it. Throughout time, as this installation accumulates wood and sediment, it'll start to function as a natural counterpart. On the inside of this installation, visitors can see each beam of the hexagons contains carvings of the stages of the salmon life cycle, highlighting the cyclical nutrient flow between salmon and large wood, forest and sea. Continuing down the Mackenzie Highway, a route used by the Booth Kelly Timber Company for log drives, the next stop, Green Island, is a Mackenzie River Land Trust restoration site. This site sits just north of the Willamette and Mackenzie River confluence. Here, visitors can see the anastomosing Willamette River. Within the braided channels of this river are islands and gravel bars. Some of these landscape features are temporary and erode away with time, yet others resist. These resilient landforms are fortified with buried log jams called hardpoints. Much like coastal erosion barriers, this installation called like log jacks have been piled up on the banks of the river. Not only are these jumbles of jacks suggestive of coastal erosion barriers, but the highlighted colors are also reminiscent of the jackstraw pattern, a pattern created by fallen trees in the forest. The installation contains multiple jacks. Each jack has a colored member representing a different decay class of wood. Carved into another member of the jack is a name of wood found in the Willamette River hardpoints. These details were added to explore how, although large wood may appear the same, it is all extremely diverse and dynamic. After Green Island, the trip heads down the Siuslaw River to Waite Ranch. Waite Ranch is a future restoration site of the Mackenzie River Land Trust. Waite Ranch is an estuary ecosystem right next to an old logging mill. At this estuary, or tidal marsh, visitors will see the importance that the structure of large wood provides in a dynamic and complicated ecosystem, which is heavily influenced by the salinity of the water. At these estuaries or tidal marshes, fresh and salt water are in a constant state of mixing. This mixing of fresh and salt water ecosystems provides an opportunity to celebrate the biodiversity that large wood supports in both ecosystems. This installation highlights the organisms that rely on large wood in both fresh and saltwater ecosystems. The form is inspired by a vernacular fish drying rack. And hanging on this fish rack is the Arboreal Angler Collection. The Arboreal Angler Collection is a series of collaborative pieces that explore Pacific Northwest ecosystems and the material culture of logging and anglers. This collection was displayed in the Lawrence Hall display cases and provided a wonderful opportunity for community engagement. The Arboreal Angler Collection uses materials, color, and form to connect to the Pacific Northwest anglers that could be strong allies for river restoration projects. Every arboreal angler is outfitted with old logging gear. This logging gear draws connections to the log drives and land management that has left the environmental legacies. At the final point, North Jetty Beach, visitors can see driftwood scattered along. This driftwood provides cover for the more fragile critters of the coast, like gribbles, sand plankton, etc. Despite appearing anchored, driftwood is constantly cycling between the shore and the sea. Driftwood that succeeds in becoming embedded in the beach stabilizes the foredunes that stabilizes the beach and protects adjacent ecosystems. The installation on North Jetty Beach represents the important structure that driftwood provides to the dunes and organisms of the coast. The timber framing of this installation is wrapped with fabric to provide shelter and create an interesting visual experience, inviting visitors closer. Its form is inspired by the ship cradles used to build Benson log rafts. These massive rafts of timber would be tugged down the coast to the south gold rush cities. As visitors approach the installation, they'll notice that every fabric panel contains an illustration of an organism. Each color fabric represents a different location of the marine ecosystem. The yellow fabric represents the beach. The lighter blue fabric represents floating ecosystem, and then the dark blue represents the deep sea. And each critter represented here relies on large wood in those ecosystems. And you can see some of the light play on the fabrics, both on the outside and the inside of such installation. Overall, this series explores the role of large wood in different ecosystems. Each installation highlights the expansive ecological value of large wood. Large wood, long legacy, intrigues people, creates a platform for discourse, educates visitors, and supports them in extrapolating their experiences outside of the trip, eventually leading to advocacy for large wood in the Pacific Northwest landscape. Large wood, long legacy merges ecology and culture in a provocative interpretation. The representation of this strategical interpretive fusion seems to be a distinctive form of environmental interpretation or science communication, maybe even historical interpretation. The strategy anchors large wood, long legacy to people and place. This aesthetic strategy, let's call it the eco-cultural interpretive synthesis, still working on the name, connects Oregon's historical logging with angler culture, a sprinkle of restoration, and extensive ecological research at H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. The elements of the strategy use visually interesting hybridizations of these topics to intrigue visitors' curiosity and their desire to understand. They also highlight how large wood connects us to Oregon's cultural history, economy, policies, environment, and the rest of the world in provocative ways. During this project, I have developed a relationship with the Mackenzie River Land Trust, H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, and of course the Fuller Initiative Land Lab. Throughout the summer, I'll be developing some select installations along with environmental interpretation or educational materials to be installed with the Mackenzie River Land Trust, H.J. Andrews, and the Land Lab. I would like to thank Fred Swanson, Michael Nelson, and the folks at H.J. Andrews for over 2 years of their continued support, insight, and newfound relationships. I'd also like to thank Mackenzie River Land Trust Holly McRae, Eli, and Krister for their time in engaging with me. And I would also like to thank my advisory team, David Buckley-Borden, design mentor, Sam DeRoshi, Fred Swanson, Michael Nelson, Will Bonner, Cadence Newens, and Rob Reevy, who all brought their insight and gave me so much valuable time and knowledge. Finally, I'd like to thank the entire community. I tried to think of everyone that I asked for help. So that goes for the woodshop warriors, the regulars, Jeffrey Billington, Sabine Winkler for helping me pull this together. Thank you for the whole community. Yeah.
Question. From the students, yes, you want to start?
Audrey, then Josh, and then Ignacio.
Great job, Ian.
Thank you.
That was an incredible presentation. It's been so fun to see how your creative process has evolved throughout this education. Your understanding of the process is really impressive. But I do have a question, and it seems that your argument is against the industrial timber industry and how it's degraded riparian habitat. However, through your installations, it appears as though you're using the same industrial process, milled lumber, probably from monocultured Douglas fir, other timber species forests to build your installations. And it feels like there's a real tension there to me. And I'm just wondering how you can reconcile that.
Totally. It is at that point where I see this really interesting intersection that can connect. So despite all that, tragic environmental legacies that were left behind, there's a really rich culture there that is in Oregon and connects Oregon communities to this state. And I see a really interesting story to be told between these this tension and conflicts. And most importantly, it provides this opportunity for discourse to really explore the impacts and also kind of reflect on the past land use. Josh?
Yeah. I was gonna say it's really nice to see where this was all going. I think everyone in studio has been seeing you work on these and has been seeing especially the arboreal anglers. And I think with visual installation art like this, you're not always going to be there to explain it, so it needs to be able to speak for itself. And after having just seen it come in and out of studio and in the boxes in Lawrence, and just from my own interpretation, seeing you finally explain it, and that it was not too far off from what I was thinking and from what I think everyone else is thinking, is I think a really big win for you. And then one small criticism is I feel like you could have named GPS log something cuter. That name is very frank.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Thank you.
So any students before we go to faculty?
This was amazing. I was really impressed by your whole process. I'm curious where you got all the historic logging materials.
Totally. Thanks for asking. So a lot of these logging materials have been collected through eBay, and they're actually on rent right now. So I tried really hard not to destroy them or hurt them in any way because, yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah.
you have to take them off of your cute thing.
We'll see what happens.
Other student questions? Ignacio, you want to go first?
Yeah. I don't really have any question because I've been following you throughout 3 years now. So and it's incredible how this is the perfect example of a curated speech that you've been developing for 3 years, not for 1 year. And I think it's how tight it is just a clear index of your maturity as a designer. So I think it's more about like acknowledging that where you are and everything that you've done. Obviously, also acknowledging like the collaborative effort from we know who, right? And basically it's just, regarding like all those questions, like, right, like this idea of but I don't think you're idealizing the wood. You're just, I think as any good artist, you're detaching yourself from the problem and then looking at everything. And he's acknowledging that there's a sad past in that, but also there's moments of like richness that we should acknowledge. And I think that you are capable of like kind of covering your ears and isolate yourself and then create your own statement about all that noise and delivering a message. And in this case, the message for me is just love for what you're doing. It's just like so much passion on everything, every piece, every image that you have shown, that it's so deeply personal that, I mean, it could not be your cup of tea, but you have to acknowledge like the masterful like process that you've followed. So yeah, congrats on that. Regarding like layers that I can see, it's kind of interesting. All the digital images that you were showing at the beginning are all yours, or you were quoting? I can't remember like the illustration.
So those are graphic abstracts of actual scientific papers. So I found literature that described different organisms interacting with large wood.
But the image is yours.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because I mean there's so much like fun, intriguing in the quality of those images. But it's sort of like the digital version of people that have done in landscape architecture before by hand sketching. And I can, point at Chip Sullivan, Kenny Halfan here, Lawrence Halprin. So people who were able to tell stories with masterful like hand drawing, right? With fun. Also, you look at those drawings and you see love, you see fun, you see like just a master like delivering their art. And I think it's the same in everything that you're doing. So kudos to you, kudos to your team, because this was just perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. I was struck by your answer to Audrey's question, because there is a perceived speaker tension between else and others and stuff.
Yep.
But your reference back to the culture is really, really spot on. When I moved here from New York, my mother gave me sometimes a great emotion to read on the bike because you need to know those things. And when I was an undergrad, there was a logging outfit out by No Tide, and they took a 1960 Volkswagen microbus, and they put a spike through it about 30 feet up on a big piece of old road next to the highway to say, you know what, to the environmentalists who were fighting. And I see that, and so that was what it was like. That was 30 years ago. And I think it's changed a lot. And what we still need to recognize the legacy of those logging towns. And we did that brilliantly in the walk, and the references to the road was there because that's what we wanted. What's the name of the barge? What was it called?
Benson Raft. It was invented in Portland. Yeah.
I learned a lot. So thank you. Thank you for all of that. And to echo what Ignacio said, to do it with the passion you do is brilliant. So keep doing it.
Sweet. Thank you.
Mark, did you want to see? Gene? Michael?
And I just wanted to say that I know you've been working a lot on writing over the last few years and being able to describe, contextualize, focus, and the script that you produced, that you read, is excellent, and so well done.
Thank you.
I guess it's time for Orion and Kimmy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton to add to what's already been said in the sense of like I think it's to Ignacio's point. I think seeing your process in the development, even from the beginning of 2 quarters ago to now, is you really moved it along well, and the presentation was spot on, right? There were any points at which it sort of lagged or anything, it really laid it out well, I think. And you told, you're doing this visual work, this landscape art, but you were also telling it with the art in the presentation. And I think that's a really important thing, that a presentation can be a form of art, right? Like it's a form of presenting this and that sort of thing. I think it also it's grappling with very complicated legacies, and I don't think that it needed. Like I think you hit the right balance there for me, in that it wasn't too delving into making a statement about what was the moral right or the wrong here, as much as this is just what happened, right? And I think that allows for access from a population of people that otherwise might be turned off by engaging in this topic. And so I think that's really well done. Good job.
Thank you.
Rob asked me, could I come in and review some projects, and then he said, you're gonna love this one. And then it just as Rob knows me for since Rob came here, and he's right. First of all, I love the kind of project, and I love the thinking about it, and I got a whole bunch of thoughts about that. I think it's particularly interesting. As Harper mentioned when he first got here, when I first moved here in 1974, from the airport into town was one giant mill. And it was old growth mills. And I used to take students to warehouses to be inside an old growth mill. And personally became fascinated with logging. Although I've never used a chainsaw bigger than anything this big. And learned a lot about it, learned a lot about its culture, and did some writing related to it. So history, I think, is critical and important. And I think it's important because it is this combination of, we tend to now focus more on the kind of environmental effects, negative environmental effects, more than the kind of culture and history, which until relatively recent, historically was heroic.
Right.
I mean, Paul Bunyan is a hero, made the blue ox. Go to the airport, there's still a kind of carved wooden mural celebrating loggers in the Pacific Northwest. And I think it's important to mention that. I think you mentioned right at the beginning, there was a set of people of inspirations, and you mentioned three artists: Buster Simpson, Maya Bennett, and Mark Dion. And I think they all do make sense here. I think when you're talking about inspiration, you need to come back to it.
Sure.
Okay, your Norse log is inspired by Buster Simpson's Norse log in Portland. Your guidebook is inspired by Mark Dion's guidebooks that he's done for places. I contributed to one of those.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so I think it's not just background information; it's continuous that you have a relationship with those sources, and they all make sense because all those individuals have seriously addressed aspects of what you're doing,
Right?
Not totality,
Right.
but aspects of it. I think I was thinking also of other regional inspirations. The U.S. Forest Service, who deals with large wood all the time. They make bridges out of it. They make ladders out of it. They make trails out of it. And beautiful. As large wood cuts across a trail, they just slice through it. I took pictures the other day. I was with Cabin on Metolius walking there. I took pictures because I said, this is a great sculpture, just the way they did that. And the most common thing that's done, I think, one of the common things done with large wood is you slice it and there's rings. Okay. Well, what those do often is what I think you're doing. The rings, everyone looks at the rings and say, oh, at a minimal level, oh, this is old. You could start counting them. And then in places, picking in the redwoods where they give the dates and so on. It's a kind of chronology, is linking something that's formal and something that's educational. And I think that's what you're doing best here in your installations. Not all of them equally well. I think particularly the first one, where you're making a formal sculptural gesture based on historic forms like log flumes and graphs and so on, and then amending that or adding to that an educational element that's based on that history, that's based on the wood, that's based on the species, etc. And I think the crux of what you're doing is that combination.
Sure.
And I think that's as opposed to just here's this sculptural thing, you figure it out.
Right. Right.
You know, people are gonna figure it out anyhow.
Mhm.
Also, most of them, frankly, you make play structures.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
which is, I would say, the major function of large wood, besides its environmental
Sure.
ecological significance, is you go through the woods with kids. They climb on these.
Definitely.
They see, can I walk the whole length of one?
Yeah.
Done this with my grandchildren.
I do that all the
I
time.
did it myself, everybody, and you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
You know, so I think you can be explicit about that,
Sure.
and recognize that.
Mhm.
At the coast, driftwood shelters are made out of large wood.
Mhm.
So I think, so that's just kind of an observation. Specifically, the installations, I love the idea of a sequential trail,
Mhm.
which is kind of like Mile-Lane's confluence
Right.
trail.
Exactly.
So that you may not do the whole thing in a day, but eventually, thinking if you live around here,
Totally.
you'll hit the wall of
Yeah.
eventually, either on purpose or by accident.
Totally.
Maybe better by accident. So I think the ones I have specific critiques of some of them.
Mhm.
I mean, the first one I think is in some ways the strongest. In many ways. You gave perfectly logical and reasonable explanations for the form that they're derived from.
Sure.
Those all make sense. I have questions about the scale.
Mhm.
It's large wood is large.
Yeah.
Really large.
Yeah.
All your installations are not large.
Right. Definitely.
They're they're
Yeah.
medium, whatever scale.
Yeah.
They're medium. You know what you have is a combination. The large wood inspires it. You're making this kind of medium-sized installation, and then you've got artifacts, which I think defining an artifact that I think is particularly interesting, and I love the idea of the floating GPS lures, if you will. But I think most of the installations are made out of like 2x4s with some equivalent of that.
Yeah. 4x4s. Yeah.
Okay, or whatever. Okay,
Totally.
standard
Yeah.
lumber.
Yeah.
I wonder why you didn't use large wood.
Yeah. So that was a big consideration.
Either
of mine.
cut up.
Yeah.
Or you know, in the installation.
Yep. Yeah. So that was a big consideration of mine, and I struggled with that on and off throughout the process of designing these pieces. But how I saw it was what I was struggling between was, do I want this to be kind of in reality? Am I able to build this? Like, do I have the capabilities of building? And then like, this is large wood. I need to go big. This is like master's project level. You go giant, right? And so I was swinging between like the reality of maybe my capabilities and then the storytelling.
But you can make large wood by scale, you know, you put these together and make it 100 feet long.
That's true.
And you
Great
know,
point. Yes.
Cutting down.
Yes.
Tree.
Yeah.
I really appreciate, and I think it's wonderful that you're continuing this and working with the Mackenzie River Trust. And knowing some of those people, that I think it'll be a rare, you know, more projects that you get to the level of actually construction and installation.
Right.
And then I would even follow it up with people's responses.
Right. Definitely.
Whatever you do, I think will be wonderful. So
Definitely.
that's terrific. It's
Thank you.
commendable.
Thank you.
So Ian's script has evolved in fascinating ways. In fact, the one you gave 2 days ago in your rehearsal and the one today was improved in all kinds of nuanced ways. I'm just totally impressed with your capacity to articulate along with to make. And the main reason Ian went with 4x4s is it was his intention to build all those and have them here in the room. But I don't think there's as much tension as was implied by 3 of the questions. I spent 22 years of my time here in Eugene deeply embedded in the invention and advocacy and implementation of ecological forestry. And so in the public lands, state and federal lands in Western Oregon, Washington, Northern California, they're now legally required to execute ecological forestry. I could talk for hours about it, but among that is prescribed amounts of down wood that must be left, and prescribed amounts of dead and standing down wood that must be left after every harvest. And so that we're now at a historical point where there is a certain amount of reconciliation between traditional cut and run, massive destruction logging versus saving it all and stopping the logging. We had a very traumatic 20-year period in the camp, and before most of you students got here or were babies, when this controversy depicted, you know, iconic by Harper's BW Stake to the Tree, and I can mention others. But I was earmarked by the US Congress. They earmarked money for me to do research and to meet with public groups all over the region. And I met with Earth Firsters and Wise Goosers and everything in between. And Coos Bay, I met with people in Coos Bay. They were pretty conservative. At one point in my lecture at Coos Bay, before our workshop, I mentioned that our project had just been featured on Oregon Public Broadcasting. Well, they didn't feature me, they interviewed me, they cut me from the program. But and to a man, they were all men in this particular group. It's Chamber of Commerce, and it's just men. They all raised their hands and said, "We don't watch public television." And that's so. Anyway, I'm digressing. The point is that there's been a lot of work done to bring the two types of consideration together. Logging was cut out of public lands for 12 years due to court injunctions, and it's coming back. And we're always going to have logging here. The world needs this softwood, but it's now being done at least on public lands in much more ecologically sensitive ways. And old growth forests that meet certain standards throughout the federal domain are not to be harvested for 350 years, and we're only 20 years into that now. Congress, I mean, nothing ever stays for years in terms of human beings, but at least that's current policy. So the students I had for 20 years learned all this stuff because I did studios about ecological forestry. You haven't had the benefit of that. So your project is very appropriate to this reconciliation. You don't have to apologize for the tension. You're helping to maintain the resolution between the extremes of just protect everything versus cut everything down and run, monetize the forest and go, which is what happened for 100 years. So Ian's project, to me, I kept helping him in the last 10 weeks of interjecting little notes. You know, this is that.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how well you incorporate everything that David told you and Michael told you and I told you in evolving a set of art. And I, like Kenny, I could quibble about, I've been quibbling with you about details of the installation, but nevertheless, it's your baby. You got to do it and you did a fantastic job.
Yes,
So
thank you. Yeah.